What do you call it when a 23-year-old kid barely 2 years into the league walks into the most hostile arena in basketball history and challenges the greatest team ever assembled? It's April 20th, 1986. The Boston Celtics, 67 wins, 5 Hall of Famers, the most dominant home record the NBA had ever seen. Larry Bird at the height of his reign, the sharpest trash talker alive, running the Garden like it was his personal kingdom. And then, Michael Jordan. No rings, no help, just fire in his eyes and a refusal to be ordinary. That night, he didn't just play the game, he rewrote it. He scored 63 points on a dynasty, forced overtime, and even left Larry Bird admitting,
"That wasn't Michael Jordan out there. It was God disguised as Michael Jordan."
"This is the night a myth was born." This is Amazing Hoops, where rivalries turn into legends and every game tells a story. So if you love the sport, if you crave the drama, the history, and the greatness, hit subscribe, turn on that notification bell, and join us courtside. Boston Garden was Larry Bird's fortress, his empire. But on that night, a 23-year-old Michael Jordan walked in like he owned the place. No fear, no crown, just pure fire. And for a few hours, even the Celtics learned what it meant to bow to a new king. So buckle up, because we're about to witness the night MJ walked into Boston and left the Celtics in shock. It's July 9th, 1984. A humid summer evening, long before the spotlight of the NBA Finals or the bright lights of Madison Square Garden. This wasn't a playoff game. It wasn't even the regular season. It was a simple exhibition. And yet, for those who watched, it felt like the first tremor of an earthquake that would reshape basketball history. On one side stood Larry Bird, already the reigning MVP, already an NBA champion, already a legend in Boston. Bird was the league's gold standard. Sharp shooting, cold-blooded, and laced with trash talk that could slice through a man's confidence. Red Auerbach once said of Bird, "He's the most unselfish superstar I've ever seen, but don't let that fool you. He wants to bury you." Bird was 27 years old, at the absolute height of his powers. On the other side was a kid, just 21, fresh out of North Carolina, the third pick in the 1984 NBA draft, behind Hakeem Olajuwon and Sam Bowie. His name? Michael Jordan. At the time, nobody really knew what Jordan would become. He was raw, explosive, and endlessly hungry. Dean Smith had taught him structure at UNC, but the NBA was a different animal. Some scouts wondered aloud, could Jordan really carry a franchise? Could his game translate against men? Jordan himself later admitted just how high the bar was.
Yeah, he did. Larry used to be a very talented basketball player. He still is. And whenever I was about his height, he used to wear me out in the backyard. And I guess from that determination just to beat him, I guess that made me work hard. And, he's just an outstanding basketball player at his height.
That night, the question stepped onto the same hardwood as the answer. Jordan's first steps against Bird were fearless. He drove into the lane with abandon, his wiry frame cutting through defenders like a blade. Bird, with that famous Indiana smirk, welcomed the challenge. Every time Jordan attacked, Bird countered, silky jumpers, off-balance fades, the kind of shots that made opponents shake their heads. It wasn't just two players competing. It was one era at its absolute peak colliding with another that was just beginning to rise. Commentators from the time recalled how different the two energies felt on the floor. Bird was deliberate, methodical, the master craftsman. Jordan was reckless, electric, and unpredictable. You could see it even then, one reporter later said. He wasn't just another rookie. He had that thing you can't coach. But here's the thing. Bird wasn't impressed by the hype. Just a few months after that summer, he'd drop a legendary 60 points on the Atlanta Hawks. So dominant that even Hawks players were caught laughing and clapping on the bench as Bird humiliated them. Bird was sending a message that year. I'm still the king. And that night against Jordan, he wasn't about to concede an inch. For fans in the stands, the sparks were undeniable. Jordan attacked with unshaped brilliance. Bird responded with polished dominance. Was this just a meaningless exhibition? Or was it something more? Looking back, we know it was the first flicker of a fire that would define basketball for the next decade. Because 2 short years later, Jordan and Bird wouldn't just share a floor. They'd clash in playoff wars that tested greatness itself. And if July 9th, 1984 taught us anything, it was this. The NBA was about to change forever. Michael Jordan's rookie year wasn't just good. It was revolutionary. In a league stacked with established giants, Jordan stormed in, averaging 28.2 points per game, the most by any rookie since Wilt Chamberlain. He finished top 4 in steals, and his player efficiency rating was the highest ever recorded for a first-year player. Night after night, he turned arenas into highlight reels, soaring dunks from impossible angles, hang-time finishes that defied physics, and a fearless aggression that left veterans stunned. As teammate Orlando Woolridge once said, "Every time he touched the ball, you thought something spectacular was about to happen." And yet, behind the spectacle, Jordan himself never saw it as easy. In his very first interview as a pro, he admitted,
to the NBA?
Well, I think it's been pretty easy. I think the Olympic was kind of pre-professional level. It was fast-paced, it was physical, and that's just the type of NBA game is. And, coming on this level is a brand new start for me, and I have to start from the bottom and work my way up. So, I think the hard work is ahead of me, and I'm willing to take on that challenge.
It was a glimpse into the paradox of Michael Jordan. He dazzled the league with jaw-dropping plays, but carried himself with the humility of someone still climbing, still chasing. He explained,
I guess the coach has been reminding me that, hey, it's a team basketball game, man. You really don't have to take burden on yourself to try to go out and do everything yourself. And I kind of picked that up. I'm not trying to do everything for myself. I just think that right now the best thing for me is to try to fit in with this ball club and try to mingle and become a winning team.
But here's the paradox. Even as Jordan lit the league on fire, it was still Larry Bird's world. Jordan himself once admitted after watching Bird catch fire,
He ain't took off his top yet. See when he took off his top. Okay, it's hard to shoot out the Bird this 2023.
Bird wasn't built for posters or Sports Center dunks. He was built for winning. By 1985, he had already collected 2 consecutive MVPs, an NBA championship, and multiple All-NBA selections. His resume was as sharp as his jumper. While Jordan dazzled with aerial artistry, Bird carved opponents apart with fundamentals and precision. Larry didn't have to fly. Magic Johnson once joked, "He beat you with his mind." Think about the contrast. Jordan was chaos wrapped in grace, the one-man fast break, the assassin in flight. Bird was geometry in motion, the perfect angle, the perfect pass, the perfect shot. One attacked your senses, the other dismantled your strategy. Which would you rather face? A human highlight film or a surgeon with ice in his veins? Commentators in the mid-'80s season often marveled at how different their games were, yet how equally unstoppable. Chick Hearn described Jordan as a guy playing in the air while everyone else is stuck on the ground. Meanwhile, Celtics announcer Johnny Most would bark about Bird's ruthless precision. That's Larry Bird basketball. He tells you where he's going, and you still can't stop him. The stats backed it up. Jordan finished his rookie year shooting nearly 52% inside the arc, despite defenses collapsing on him. Bird, in that same window, was shooting over 42% from 3 in certain stretches, a number absurd for the era. Jordan scored by detonating defenses. Bird scored by dissecting them. And yet, despite their styles clashing, they shared a single trait: killer instinct. Neither man wanted to just win. They wanted to humiliate you doing it. Larry Bird once famously told an opponent, "Who's coming in second tonight?" Jordan, a few years later, would echo the same mentality when he said, "I don't have a problem if I lose to someone better, but I'll be damned if I lose because I didn't try." So here we had it. 2 icons, 2 styles. One airborne, one earthbound. One raw fire, the other cold steel. Fans couldn't help but wonder, what happens when unstoppable force meets an immovable object? Would Bird's precision outlast Jordan's explosion? Or was the young bull destined to dethrone the reigning king? The stage was set, and the league braced itself. Because this wasn't just 2 players. This was 2 philosophies colliding, and only one could define the era. Before the 1986 postseason, Michael Jordan had already tested himself against Larry Bird's Celtics 7 different times. And while Jordan's numbers were dazzling, averaging over 31 points a game against Boston, including a 41-point outburst, the truth was undeniable. The Celtics owned the matchup. They won 6 of those 7 games, most of them in decisive, almost dismissive fashion. Jordan could fly, he could score, he could make jaws drop, but he was still a one-man show trying to solve a basketball machine. The Celtics of the mid-1980 season weren't just a team. They were a dynasty in full swing. Boston finished the 85-86 season with a record of 67 wins and 15 losses, and more importantly, an absurd 41 at the Boston Garden. Think about that. Only one team the entire season walked into that building and walked out with a win. Everyone else, whether it was Magic's Lakers, Dominique's Hawks, or Jordan's Bulls, left beaten, bruised, and bewildered. We felt invincible at home. Bird would later admit, the crowd, the floorboards, the atmosphere. It was our fortress. And years later, Bird would recall that playoff duel in vivid detail.
But it was an incredible playoff performance. I've never seen it before, and I had never seen it after.
If I said Michael Jordan, what would you say?
I think unbelievable. I mean, I can tell you some things that happened in the games against us. One time I turned, I jumped, and he still went. His knees almost hit me in the chin. And that's when I realized that this guy's pretty special for his jumping ability, but cat quick. He closed down a pass lane as fast as anybody ever seen, and just a phenomenal player.
And it wasn't just Bird. That Celtics roster was stacked with firepower. 5 future Hall of Famers: Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, Dennis Johnson, and Bill Walton anchoring the bench. Their front court, Bird, McHale, Parrish, was so dominant that Charles Barkley once said, "You weren't beating those guys up front. It was like facing 3 giants who all knew how to play." Now contrast that with Jordan's Bulls. Chicago limped into the playoffs at 30-52, the worst record of any team in the postseason bracket. They were young, shallow, and inconsistent. Jordan had missed 64 games that year with a broken foot. And though he returned just in time for the stretch run, the Bulls were still essentially a lottery team sneaking into the dance. Their second leading scorer was Orlando Woolridge at 20 points per game. And outside of Dave Corzine and Gene Banks, the supporting cast wasn't striking fear into anyone. So when the playoff matchup was announced, Chicago versus Boston, most didn't even see it as a contest. The Celtics were supposed to crush them. Analysts predicted a sweep before the series even tipped off. Legendary broadcaster Johnny Most captured the mood perfectly. This isn't a matchup, it's a mismatch. Boston's playing chess, and Chicago's still learning checkers. And yet, hidden beneath those lopsided numbers and expectations was a seed of tension. Because while Boston had size, depth, and discipline, they had no real answer for the sheer force of Michael Jordan's will. Even Larry Bird admitted later, "When he came at you, you couldn't stop him. You just hoped he missed." So the question lingered. Could one man, a 23-year-old kid still shaking off an injury, actually challenge what many still call the greatest team ever assembled? Could Jordan turn what everyone assumed would be a quick execution into something else? Something unforgettable? The stage was set. On one side, the mighty Celtics, kings of the Garden. On the other, a wounded Bulls team with nothing but Michael Jordan's firepower. Nobody expected a duel, but that's exactly what they were about to get. Game 1 of the 1986 first-round series looked, at first glance, exactly like the prophecy fulfilled. The mighty Boston Celtics, winners of 67 games, undefeated in 40 of 41 contests at the Boston Garden, steamrolled to a 123-104 victory. This was the machine in motion. Larry Bird with 23 points and 9 rebounds. Kevin McHale, smooth in the post, with 21. Robert Parrish's length anchoring the paint. Dennis Johnson, ever the defensive stopper, controlling the tempo. Danny Ainge adding range and hustle. Depth, balance, execution. It was Boston basketball at its cold, merciless peak, but buried inside that blowout was something no one could ignore. A revelation, a warning shot. Michael Jordan, just 23 years old and barely recovered from a broken foot that had robbed him of most of his second season, scored 49 points. He did it against the league's best defense. He did it against a team many still argue is the greatest roster ever assembled. Jordan's performance wasn't empty stats in garbage time. It was relentless. He attacked Kevin McHale's wingspan, elevated over Parrish's towering frame, drove past Dennis Johnson's smothering defense, and left Danny Ainge flat-footed more than once. He sliced, soared, and fought through wave after wave of Hall of Fame defenders, and somehow kept scoring.
Jordan wants it. Loves to go to his right. You got to force him to go to his left if possible.
A clear aside for Jordan. Michael will take it, he got it.
Force him to his left. You can't go and drift too far, otherwise he'll wait and still go over you. I mean, you are really at a disadvantage guarding Michael Jordan.
It's the first Celtic lead in this ball game. 8 minutes to go first quarter. Jordan got a step.
I mean, TJ DJ was hanging right on his shooting hand that time. And Jordan, with that great leaping ability, wasn't even bothered.
The Celtics' schemes had no answer. As one commentator admitted,
The one-on-one defense is not exactly working for the Celtics against Jordan, and the team concept isn't working either. They've missed him several times after he's beaten his man.
the kid is unbelievable. Celtics broadcaster Johnny Most marveled on the call. He's scoring on everybody out there. Think about it. In just his second playoff appearance, Jordan poured in more points than Bird, McHale, and Parrish combined. Against a defense designed to suffocate scores, he shot 54% from the field, sank 10 of 12 free throws, and added 5 rebounds and 5 assists. The Celtics controlled the scoreboard, yes, but the story, the whispers, belonged to Jordan. Larry Bird himself felt it, though he didn't deliver his now legendary, God disguised as Michael Jordan line until after Game 2. Bird admitted later that Game 1 was the moment he knew Jordan was different. He showed us right away he wasn't afraid of the Garden. Most guys, you get them here, you can smell the fear. He had none of it. The Garden faithful, famous for devouring opponents, buzzed in disbelief. Boston had won the game, but fans leaving the building weren't talking about the scoreboard. They were talking about number 23 in red. Was this rookie turned sophomore really about to push the Empire? Could one man seriously tilt the balance against 5 future Hall of Famers? For Chicago, there was no moral victory. They were still down 0-1. But for the NBA, the tremors were undeniable. If Jordan could score 49 on the greatest team in basketball, in the most hostile building in the league, what would he do next? The Celtics had flexed their balance. The Bulls had lost. But Michael Jordan had fired his first shot at greatness, and the echoes of it would only grow louder in Game 2. April 20th, 1986. The Boston Garden. The Chicago Bulls trailed the Boston Celtics 0-1 in the series. They were outmatched, undermanned, and widely expected to be swept aside. The Celtics were the powerhouse, with 67 wins and 15 losses on the season, 40 wins and 1 loss at home, 5 Hall of Famers in the rotation. The Bulls? They were a 30-52 team dragged into the playoffs almost entirely by one man. But Michael Jordan walked into that parquet floor with fire in his eyes. And what followed was the single greatest individual scoring performance in NBA playoff history. 63 points. The parameters were staggering. 22 for 41 from the field, 53.7%, 19 for 21 from the free throw line, 90.5%, with a true shooting percentage of 62.7%. He did it without the three-point shot. Jordan didn't make a single three that night. Every bucket came against a collapsing defense. Every jumper contested by long arms. Every drive through a thicket of Hall of Fame defenders. Still, he scored, and kept scoring. He dropped 54 in regulation, then tacked on 5 more in the first overtime and 4 more in the second, carrying the Bulls to the brink of the impossible. Chicago ultimately fell 135-131, but nobody left the Garden talking about the scoreboard. They were talking about the 23-year-old who had just shredded the greatest team in the league. Larry Bird himself delivered the line that would live forever.
That wasn't Michael Jordan out there. It was God disguised as Michael Jordan.
Coming from a man as cold-blooded and competitive as Bird, it wasn't hyperbole. It was respect, carved out of fire and inevitability. Jordan, years later, reflected on that moment.
He paid me the highest compliment, and I think that was very gratifying that I earned Larry Bird's respect.
Celtics guard Dennis Johnson, a 5-time All-Defensive selection, admitted years later, "We threw everything at him. Me, Ainge, even traps with McHale. It didn't matter. He just kept coming." Danny Ainge echoed the same after the game. "He was so good. It was embarrassing. You used hope at miss." Think about what Jordan was up against. The Celtics front line, Bird, McHale, Parrish, stood as the most dominant in NBA history. Off the bench, they could turn to Bill Walton, a former MVP, and Rick Carlisle, a sharp shooter who stretched defenses. Their defense had swallowed Magic Johnson, Dominique Wilkins, and just about every scorer of the era, yet Jordan sliced through them for 63 points, the most ever scored in a playoff game, a record that still stands almost 4 decades later. And here's the kicker. Jordan did it in just his second season. After missing most of the year with a broken foot, he wasn't at full rhythm, didn't have an all-star teammate, and was guarded by some of the best perimeter defenders of the decade. Still, he turned Boston Garden into his personal showcase. So yes, the Bulls lost, but that night, Jordan won something greater. He didn't just challenge the Empire, he forced them to kneel, even if only for a moment. The whispers after Game 1 had become a roar, because April 20th, 1986 wasn't just a playoff game. It was the night Michael Jordan ascended into basketball mythology. This wasn't the pace and space NBA we know today. There were no stretch fours pulling defenders to the arc, no five-out offense, no floor spacing to give Michael Jordan clean driving lanes. The Chicago Bulls of 1986 had no three-point shooters to speak of, no Scottie Pippen, no Horace Grant. Their roster was young, thin, and predictable. And every time Jordan touched the ball, the Celtics knew exactly where it was going. Boston swarmed. Larry Bird shaded his way. Kevin McHale extended those impossibly long arms. Robert Parrish patrolled the paint. Dennis Johnson hounded him on the perimeter. Bill Walton came in off the bench, closing angles like a second wall. Sometimes it wasn't just a double team. There were 3 defenders, sometimes 4. And in certain possessions, all 5 Celtics had their eyes glued to number 23. And yet, Jordan thrived in the storm. His usage rate in Game 2 clocked at 44.5%. Nearly half of Chicago's offensive possessions ran through him. In an era when stars typically hovered in the low 30 seconds, this was unheard of. On that night, Michael Jordan wasn't just carrying his team. Out of his 41 field goal attempts, 38 were contested. Not lightly challenged, not brushed by a hand, fully contested, with bodies draped over him and arms reaching from every angle. Still, he made 22 of them, shooting 53.7% against what was considered the toughest defense in the league. He added 19 for 21 from the line, 90.5%, absorbing punishment but never losing composure. His true shooting percentage, 62.7%, was elite by today's advanced metrics, let alone in the grinded-out 1980 season. The way he scored was even more mesmerizing. One-footed, leaning layups through traffic. Acrobatic reverses that left McHale and Parrish frozen like statues. Double-clutch finishes in midair, as if he had more time to decide than anyone else. Jordan didn't just survive the storm, he was the storm. Celtics guard Danny Ainge admitted later, "We were all over him. I had him, DJ had him, Kevin came with help. It didn't matter. He just kept hitting shots." McHale echoed the same in awe. "I've never seen a guy hang that long in the air. You thought he was coming down, and then bucket." Think about the context. No Scottie Pippen. He wouldn't arrive until the 1987 draft. No shooters to space the floor. Chicago shot just 1 for 9 from 3 as a team that night. Every possession was a battle of attrition, with Boston stacking defenders around the paint. And yet, Jordan broke through it again and again, scoring more points by himself than the rest of his team combined. Larry Bird summed it up best after the series. "We were trying to defend him with everybody, and it still wasn't enough. He was doing things no one else could do." And Bird wasn't the only one. Decades later, when legends were asked to choose between Bird and Jordan, their answers painted the same picture. Charles Barkley admitted,
To me, it's Michael, for 2 reasons. Number one, he won more championships, so I give him that. But look at who they played with. Bird played with the greatest front line ever, 2 other Hall of Famers, played with Dennis Johnson, another Hall of Famer. You know, Michael had Scottie the first time, they still won 3. Next time, you know, they had another Hall of Famer in Dennis Rodman, but when he had 1 Hall of Famer, he won 3. And then when he got Dennis Rodman, they won another 3. And I think people forget, he retired in his prime the first time. They probably would have won 2 more championships. His numbers are so much better than those other guys.
So ask yourself, what kind of willpower does it take to keep attacking when the entire defense is waiting for you? What kind of player absorbs 5 defenders and still makes them look helpless? That was Michael Jordan in the spring of 1986. Not just battling through the storm, becoming the storm. Don't get it twisted. Larry Bird wasn't a bystander in that legendary showdown. While Jordan was putting on his solo act, Bird responded with the poise and mastery that defined him. He tallied 36 points, 12 rebounds, and 8 assists. A near triple-double that reminded everyone why he was the reigning 3-time MVP. He didn't need to match Jordan's raw explosion shot for shot. Instead, he manipulated the game like a puppeteer, using fakes, footwork, and passes that carved up Chicago's defense. Years later, Shaquille O'Neal would admit just how real Bird's greatness was.
I actually used to hate Larry Bird. I hated him. Because,
why?
I mean, because, well, not hate him, I was sort of like, jealous of him because he was a regular guy that did everything. He shouted in your face, he had to fade away. One time, I was watching a game, they was playing somebody, and I was betting this guy, and he was falling out of bounds, and he shot that thing over the backboard and it went in. I was like, I thought most of what he did was luck, but as I, got older and kept watching, I just knew that it was skill. And, for him to even have his name mentioned in this category with Magic and Michael Jordan just shows how great of a player he was.
One possession, he'd bury a mid-range jumper with that unorthodox release. The next, he'd whip a no-look pass to McHale or Parrish for an easy finish. Bird wasn't chasing highlights, he was controlling outcomes. But here's where the difference became obvious. Bird didn't stand alone. He had an army behind him. Kevin McHale chipped in 27 points, torturing the Bulls with his post-up wizardry. His up-and-under moves were so smooth that Charles Barkley once admitted, "Kevin had the best low-post game ever. You knew it was coming, and you still couldn't stop it." Danny Ainge was scorching hot from the perimeter, adding 24 points, punishing Chicago every time they tilted their defense too far toward Jordan. His timely threes and fearless drives were the kind of support Jordan could only dream about. Dennis Johnson, the defensive stopper who made life miserable for so many guards in the '80s season, still found time to score 15 points while orchestrating possessions on the other end. DJ was the glue, Bird often said. He made us a team. Robert Parrish, the chief, added 13 points and his usual rim protection, making Jordan earn every layup he attempted. And off the bench came Bill Walton, the former MVP reinvented as the league's ultimate sixth man. He dropped 10 points in just 14 minutes, bringing energy, passing, and size that no second unit in the NBA could match. Walton once said of that team, "It was basketball paradise. Everybody contributed. Everybody knew their role." That was Boston's strength, balance. They didn't need one man to do everything. Their offense flowed like a symphony. Bird conducting, McHale providing the strings, Parrish the bass, Johnson the rhythm, Ainge the brass, and Walton off the bench adding the flourish. When Chicago collapsed on Bird, someone else punished them. When Jordan collapsed the defense on the other end, there was no bull waiting to step up. The parameters told the story. Jordan scored 63 points. The rest of his teammates combined for 68. Boston's starting five plus Walton gave Bird 89 points of support. That's why the Celtics ultimately escaped in double overtime. Jordan's brilliance pushed them to the edge, but Bird's machine had more weapons, more answers, more ways to win. As Bird said afterward, "He was unbelievable, but we had too many guys." That's what made us who we were, and that's the lesson of Game 2. Jordan was the storm, but Boston was the mountain. And on that night in April 1986, the mountain held. When the final buzzer sounded in Game 2, the Celtics had survived a double overtime classic. They escaped 135-131, pushing the Bulls to the brink, but not breaking. The scoreboard said Boston had won, but history only remembered one man, Michael Jordan. Reporters crowded the locker rooms afterward, scribbling furiously, knowing they had just witnessed something transcendent. Jordan's 63 points, still the most ever scored in a playoff game, wasn't just a number. It was a statement, a prophecy written in sweat and defiance. But the real immortalization came not from Jordan himself, but from the man he had just battled. Larry Bird, three-time MVP, Finals MVP, and the league's fiercest competitor, sat before the press, and with his trademark bluntness, delivered a line that would echo through time. That was God disguised as Michael Jordan. "Oh," from Bird, this wasn't casual flattery. This was a coronation. Remember, Larry Bird was no ordinary trash talker. He was the sharpest tongue in NBA history. The man who once told defenders exactly where he was going to shoot from, then buried the jumper in their faces. He rarely praised opponents. Respect had to be earned, often painfully, which made his words that night all the more powerful. Bird admitted openly, "We had everyone guarding him, Dennis. Danny, myself, Kevin, and we still couldn't stop him." Coming from a Celtics team stacked with 5 future Hall of Famers, it was as good as bending the knee. Think about the parameters. Jordan had taken 41 shots, 38 of them contested. He logged a 44.5% usage rate, meaning nearly half of Chicago's possessions went through him. He absorbed traps, doubles, and full collapses, and still produced 63 points on 53.7% shooting from the field, 90.5% from the line, and a true shooting of 62.7%. It wasn't just volume, it was efficient at a supernatural level. Bird's comment reflected that realization. For years, the Celtics had been the standard bearers, the team of balance and brilliance. Now, before their very eyes, a 23-year-old had nearly toppled them single-handedly. Dennis Johnson, who had spent most of the game chasing Jordan, shook his head post-game. "I've never seen anything like it. He just kept coming." Danny Ainge added, "He was so good, it was embarrassing. We tried everything. It didn't matter." And yet, perhaps the most telling reaction wasn't what they said. It was how they looked. For the first time, Boston's dynasty had been put on notice. The Garden crowd, normally merciless, had been reduced to stunned admiration. Commentators who had predicted an execution were instead whispering about inevitability. The question lingered in the air. If Jordan could do this now with no help, what would happen when he had a team around him? Larry Bird's line captured all of it in one unforgettable phrase. It wasn't just praise. It was an acknowledgement that the NBA had changed forever. On April 20th, 1986, Jordan lost the game but won something bigger. He won the respect of the greatest trash talker the league had ever seen. And if Larry Bird called you God in sneakers, what else was left to prove? When the dust settled, the Boston Celtics did exactly what everyone expected. They swept the Chicago Bulls 3-0, then rolled through the postseason, capturing the 1986 NBA championship. With a staggering 67 wins and 15 losses in the regular season, a 40-1 home mark, and 5 Hall of Famers, they cemented their place as one of the greatest teams ever assembled. But for all of Boston's dominance, the spotlight of that spring didn't belong to the champions. It belonged to Michael Jordan. His 63-point masterpiece in Game 2 didn't just break records. It rewrote basketball mythology. He shattered Elgin Baylor's old playoff mark of 61 points, set back in 1962, and nearly 4 decades later, the record still stands. Jordan's parameters from that night were surgical. 22 for 41 shooting, 53.7%, 19 for 21 at the line, 90.5%, with a true shooting of 62.7%. Against the NBA's toughest defense, with virtually no spacing, no Pippen, no Grant, and no real help. He did the impossible. Larry Bird's Celtics may have advanced, but Bird himself admitted the truth. After the series, he told reporters, "I think he's the most awesome player in the NBA today. It's just a matter of time before he's the best ever." For a man who rarely gave praise, especially to opponents, it was as close to prophecy as you'll hear in sports. Of course, the Celtics still had the upper hand. Bird would finish his playoff career 6-0 against Jordan. Every time the Bulls met Boston in the 1980 season, Chicago was simply outgunned, but fans and players alike could sense it. The balance of power was shifting. The dynasty of the present had just collided with the dynasty of the future. And behind the scenes, Jordan's myth grew even larger. On the eve of Game 2, Jordan played golf with Danny Ainge. Competitive to his core, he lost the match and some cash. He didn't take it well. Later that night, he told Ainge, "Tell your boy DJ, I got something for him tomorrow." The next day, 63 points. Was it a coincidence? Not for Michael Jordan. This was who he was. Every slight, every loss, every bruise turned into fuel. He could turn a casual golf game into a reason to unleash the greatest scoring performance the NBA had ever seen. Celtics guard Dennis Johnson, the man Jordan was aiming at, admitted later, "We threw everybody at him, and he still got 63. You just had to tip your hat." Even Danny Ainge, years after, said, "That was the night we knew he was different. He was going to own the league." The Celtics would lift the trophy that year. They would be remembered as one of the greatest teams of all time. But ask anyone what truly defined the 1986 playoffs, and you won't hear about Boston's coronation. You'll hear about the night a 23-year-old, with no help and no chance, walked into the Garden and made history. Because April 20th, 1986 wasn't just about a loss. It was about a revelation. It was the night Michael Jordan showed the world that even in defeat, legends are born. Their paths would cross again and again, 2 legends on parallel tracks. In the mid-1980s season, the NBA was Larry Bird's kingdom. He was the 3-time consecutive MVP, the face of a Celtics dynasty that had gone 67 wins and 15 losses in 1986, and lifted the franchise's 16th banner. Bird's style was cerebral and ruthless. He wasn't the fastest, wasn't the strongest, but he was the most unrelenting mind on the floor. He could bend a game with a glance, with a pass, with a perfectly timed dagger from the wing. Michael Jordan, meanwhile, was still climbing. In the 1980 season, his brilliance was undeniable. He averaged over 30 points per game in 7 straight seasons starting in 86, 87. But his Bulls lacked the support to topple Boston's machine or Detroit's bruising bad boys. For a time, Bird's Celtics owned the head-to-head. In fact, Bird finished his playoff career 6-0 against Jordan. And yet, time has a way of rewriting balance sheets. By the 1990 season, the NBA was Michael Jordan's world. 6 championships, 2 three-peats, 5 MVPs, 10 scoring titles, a global superstar whose influence stretched from Chicago Stadium to every playground on earth. He didn't just dominate the league, he transformed it. As Magic Johnson famously said, "There's Michael Jordan, and then there's the rest of us." Bird, battling injuries, retired in 1992 after 3 titles, 3 MVPs, and a resume that cemented him as one of the greatest forwards the game has ever seen. But even as he stepped away, his words from that April night in 1986 still hung in the air. That was God disguised as Michael Jordan. Looking back, that moment in Boston Garden feels less like a throwaway compliment and more like prophecy. Because what Bird and the Celtics witnessed that night wasn't just a young star scoring points, it was the birth of basketball mythology. Jordan stopped being just a prospect. He stopped being just a great rookie. He became something larger, a figure destined to redefine the game. Bird himself admitted later in reflection, "We beat him in the 80 season, but everybody knew what was coming. You couldn't stop it. He was going to take over the league, and that's the beauty of their rivalry." Bird and Jordan never met in the finals, never had the kind of direct back-and-forth wars that Magic and Bird shared. But their clash in the 1986 playoffs symbolized a passing of the torch, one era at its zenith, another clawing its way to the throne. So which do you remember more, the dynasty that won the battles, or the player who eventually won the war? Bird's Celtics remain legends, their dominance undisputed. But Jordan's Bulls became immortals, carrying the NBA into its golden global age. And that night in April '86, it was more than a game. It was the spark of inevitability. The moment Michael Jordan stopped being just a man in a jersey and became something eternal. That night, he wasn't simply a young star. He wasn't simply a challenger. He was myth. Michael Jordan lost the game. He lost the series. The Celtics swept him aside on their march to the 1986 championship. But that night, April 20th, 1986, no one cared about the scoreboard. The world had witnessed something greater, the birth of a myth. Jordan's 63 points didn't just break a record. They shattered the limits of imagination. Against the most balanced, most dominant roster of the decade, he stood alone and still looked unstoppable. Larry Bird, the man who defined winning in the '80 season, summed it up best. That was God disguised as Michael Jordan. For once, the league's coldest trash talker wasn't cutting down an opponent. He was acknowledging a force too great to ignore. And maybe that's the lesson. Greatness isn't always measured in victories or banners. Sometimes it's measured in the moments when talent becomes destiny. When the world sees not just who a player is, but who they are about to become. Jordan's Bulls weren't ready yet. Bird's Celtics still reigned. But the future? It had already arrived. If you like this video, don't forget to press the subscribe button and ring the bell to not miss the latest videos from Amazing Hoops. Please leave your comments and suggestions below in the comments section, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. This action also motivates us to try harder. Have a nice day.